We're going to be talking this evening about recording the biodiversity around us, bio-blitzing and contributing to your local biodiversity records. I should say that I'm by no means an expert in any of the aspects, but when we found out that there were no records for our area, we set about learning how we could contribute to the records and researching the various elements to make sure that we were achieving what we wanted to from the records. So I'm just going to start the opening. I've shamelessly pinched from the Wildlife Oxfordshire website because it perfectly sums up the importance of biodiversity data. So wildlife conservation relies on data, knowing where particular species are, where they have been lost and where they might potentially be at risk, informs efforts to protect them from impacts of development, changing land use and habitat loss. This information can also help identify potential hotspots where species might thrive in future, where efforts to restore and enhance habitat should be focused, or where species reintroduction programs may have the most chance of success. Local environmental record centres are hubs for this information, holding records collected by wildlife groups, naturalists, ecologists and researchers, and passing them on to those that need them to ensure local decisions about planning and development, sustainable land management, research and conservation are driven by robust data. These record centres need your help. Everyone can play a part in the submitting of wildlife observations to local environmental record centres. This is so that they appear on the official record that is consulted by planning authorities and used by other parties to track changes in distribution and abundance. Now have at the bottom of a lot of the slides put a big red banner just to remind people it's really important that whatever you're doing and however you're doing it, that the records do end up with the local environmental record centre. In our case, for most of us, for Oxfordshire, certainly is Thames Valley Environmental Record Centre, TVERC. Okay, so what does recording in a BioBlitz mean? So a BioBlitz is just basically trying to record as many species in an area as possible. So a little bit like you might say, I'm going to have a cleaning blitz today, and I'm just going to clean as much of my house as I can, get as many jobs done. So a BioBlitz is the same sort of principle, but far more enjoyable than cleaning. So what you're actually going to do is you're just importantly going to observe what you see around you. You're going to note where, when and what you saw, and you're also going to collect evidence, ideally a photograph. Your observation then can be verified by an expert in the relevant species that you've observed, and then your observation becomes a record. So the National Biodiversity Network Atlas, I just wanted to mention these. So all of the environmental record centres were established completely independently across the country, which means that they all have slightly different ways of doing things, different processes, and they all operate, they're all fantastic, but they all operate differently. So so you can't assume that just because one record centre does one thing, that another one does the same. And we find here we are on a county border, and so we fall within two record centres that we work with here in Nethercourt, and they both are very supportive, but both different. So we have to ensure that we adopt the correct approach. So the National Biodiversity Network Atlas is basically an aim to bring everything together across the whole of the UK. So currently some record centres feed into it and some don't. So as I keep saying, stressing, currently, it's really important that your records go to the record, to your local environmental record centre, for them to be contributing. So why is it important to be recording? So these are just some of the the general reasons why we'll all have our different motivations to why we want to be doing it. Your records will be recorded for the future. So what you send into your record centres now, the record centres are they're just sponges for data, and they just keep all of the data. And who knows, something that's common today, in 10 years' time, it may not be common, and it may be important to know where it once was, and to be, sort of to be able to track the trends in that. It ensures as many species as possible are documented in an official place. So there's lots of species specific groups that will have their own records, but this is one central place where all of the different species are recorded all together. Less reliance on ecological studies, and that can also create issues with seasonal species. So some species, for example, if you walk down our lane here in Nethercote, at the moment you'll see lots and lots of snowdrops, but you won't see any butterflies. That isn't because we don't have butterflies. If you walk down the lane in August, you would see plenty of butterflies, but you would see no snowdrop. That is because they are seasonal species. So unless the recording is actually taking place at the time when they're present, then they won't be recorded. So by contributing to the records, you can ensure that for your area, all of the seasonal species are recorded. The records are used when assessing development proposals. So lots of times you'll hear people say, but we have this present, we have that present. But if it's not recorded and it's not with the record centre, then it will be overlooked. It means by people contributing to the records, it means that there's more independence of the records, because of course the more people that are contributing, the more independent the records are. Your records can be used to help conservation and nature recovery initiatives. The people that are running those types of projects will be taking their records from the record centre. And also for research into specific species, perhaps ones that are declining, or just for some other reason that they're being looked at. And as I keep saying, it's really important that how you're doing your recording, that the records are ending up with the local record centre. Okay, so what to record then? What are you going to record? So literally everything, any living thing that you see in the wild. So when I say in the wild, so if you were looking at plants, for example, you wouldn't be looking at the plants you've planted in your own garden. You'd be looking at the plants that as you go out of your property, and the plants that you see then. But of course, if a bird flies into your garden, then you would record that. So it's not to say that you can't record in your garden. It's just that we are looking for the records are for things that you find in the wildlife. Flora, trees, mollusks, insects, pollinators, birds, mammals, literally everything, everything that you see. Don't ignore the common species. As I mentioned earlier, something that's common today may not be common in the future, but there's also other sort of uses for the data, such as looking at sort of species richness, for example, and those types of information are calculated on the number of species present. So if you ignore all of your common species, you're automatically reducing incorrectly the number of species that are present in the area. So literally any living thing that you see, and all instances, because of course, if you see something once, say, I don't know, a woodpecker flies into your garden, you take a picture and you record that, and then the next day it comes back, or a week later it comes back, and you don't record it again, who's to say that that wasn't just a one-off? So if you want to be evidencing that something is present in your area, then you need to be demonstrating that by recording multiple instances. Okay, so what will you actually do? What does it actually involve doing your recording? So first of all, you're going to be observant to what living species you see around you. So some people might just have a specific interest in a specific species or a specific group. Some people might have a specific motivation because they know about some research that's happening for a specific species that they want to contribute to. Or some people just like us, we just record everything that we see, and don't get put off by not being any expert. We have no expertise in any of the species, but all of the records get verified, and there's lots of support there to help you. So when you've made an observation, then what you'll also find is that the more you record and the more you note what you're observing, the more that you all of a sudden that you see that you didn't perhaps notice before. So you need to take a photo of what you see and accurately record the location and the date. So most smartphones these days have a function where you can enable, I think it's called geotagging, but what that does is if you turn that on when you take a photo, it will record the time and the date and also the GPS, and that can be really helpful if you're actually uploading your records when you get back home, because that can help to be able to plot where that they were. So of course, the clearer the picture you provide, the better the chance of a verification and an accurate verification. So we did spend some time looking at other people's records on, particularly on iNaturalist, and I found that a really useful exercise, because sometimes you take a picture, you've taken a picture of a hedge in front of you, and you know that there's a little sparrow right in the middle of it, but when it's not, you've taken the photo and you don't know where that sparrow is, then you realize how difficult it can be. And what will happen is if the photos aren't clear enough, then the verifier won't be able to verify your record so as clear as possible. So you'll need to identify accurately what it is that you've seen. And again, don't be overwhelmed by this. It will be verified if you make a mistake, but you should, of course, do your best to make sure that your ID is accurate. So there's lots of sources of support to help you, and there's lots of identification apps, guidebooks, field guides. Most specific species would have some sort of national sort of group that would provide information and perhaps support on their particular species. You get a lot of help from Facebook groups dedicated to specific species where people help each other, and lots of apps, as I talked about before, it's important if you're using an app to remember that it's AI, so it's just doing its best guess to match that photo you've uploaded. And what can be interesting is if you take a picture of say, for example, a bird from different angles, perhaps, you know, it lands in the tree, you get a picture and it takes off in flight. And then from a different angle, maybe it's got its wings in a different position as it's flying. Sometimes you just, you know, you can put each picture through an app and you get perhaps a different result for each one. So once, if it's not a species you're confident with, then I would suggest that once you've used the app to get an idea, that you then do check that out in field guides to make sure that it's accurate. As I say, what you determine the ID will be verified by an expert, but of course the more or the better your records are, then the more the verifiers are going to be willing to spend their time, because that's all done voluntarily looking. Okay, so you then make a record of the species, the abundance, the date and the location, and upload your photo to wherever you've decided to use. So as well as contributing to your local biodiversity records, you do learn a lot, and by default, and your knowledge gets better the more you're IDing, and it's lots of fun, but it can also be very addictive. You can find it hard to look out the window and not see something and want to record it. So how to record then? So in the slides there is some specific information on iRecord and iNaturalist. I'm going to skip through those just in the just because of time this evening, but I'm going to leave the information in the slides, which I believe will be uploaded too, so you can look through those afterwards. We personally use predominantly iRecord, mostly because we can communicate directly with the verifiers. If they've got a query, they can come to us directly. iNaturalist goes via iRecord, but that is a very useful app too, and it can be a little bit more user friendly for people that aren't proper hardcore recorders. You can use a combination of sources, so you could use so in iNaturalist, for example, you've got almost like a crowd information, so you can sort of upload a photo that you've got no idea, and then other people can suggest what that is, which you don't get that in iRecord, so that can be useful. So, and that's fine. You could put something in, you know, use a combination, but the important thing is to make sure just to think of how your records are going to progress, and to make sure that you're not going to duplicate, so that they're not going sort of two different routes, and then they're both going to end up with the record center, which obviously those guys are just, you know, they're sort of dealing with data, huge quantities of data. They do an amazing job, so we don't want to inadvertently add to their workload by doing something that we could easily avoid just by thinking of what's going to happening. So you will find that there's lots of species-specific studies that you can get involved in. So examples of these are things like hedgehog street, your local badger groups, iButterfly, ancient tree inventory, some examples of species-specific studies. So you're collecting data just for that specific species, and you're reporting it to the organisation that's running the study, and yes, you're contributing to that study, and whatever that is being used for. If you are contributing to a species-specific study, that's great. We try to upload our records to any that don't feed into the local record centre. So do check and ask the question: does this study, do the results feed into the local record centre or not? Again, just to make sure that you're not duplicating records. As I said before, I can't stress it enough not to be overwhelmed if you're a novice, because all the records are verified, and so you shouldn't feel overwhelmed about being involved. Okay, so this is so I've talked about some of these things, and I'm going to sort of skip through these, but iRecord or iNaturalist, with the sort of benefits of each ones. Generally speaking, if you're fairly confident with the species, then iRecord, and we personally have used, because the records get verified. The records get verified directly there, and you can have the feedback directly from the verifier. And because our specific aim is to get the records to the local environmental record centre, then that suits our purpose. But as I say, iNaturalist, as I said before, is lots of pictures. Some people do sort of prefer that, and I have got some just some pictures of the how you're recording. So in iRecord you can see, and in iNaturalist, so you can see you start to type, and it comes up with all the things that it could be. So so that can be very helpful too. So as I mentioned briefly earlier, anything that you import into, enter into iNaturalist, under certain circumstances, it will import through to iRecord, but then it still needs to be verified in iRecord before it would sort of go further. So, for example, our record centre TVERC, they upload from iRecord all verified records in January, so just once a year. They get uploaded if they're not verified, and sometimes it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with your record, but the verifiers, as I mentioned earlier, are volunteers, and some species and in some areas they just don't have, there's just not the capacity, and there's not anyone to verify the records. So it's important that you sort of keep a check on the verification of your records, and again, if it's important that they end up at your local environment to record centre in a timely fashion, then you can speak to them and send the results directly. So that's what we do. We use iRecord predominantly, and then we also send the records directly to the record centre, and we have a system so that they know which records have been verified, and so which will get uploaded to make sure that there's no duplication. So there's just information on sort of recording in iRecord and iNaturalist, which is the time of just not going to go into that in detail. So one of the things that I wanted to mention was, as I mentioned at the start, this was our research into, we wanted to make sure that our records were ending up where they needed to, and we wanted to find out, and we sort of tracked the data, did quite a lot of research with each of our records to make sure that they were ending up where they should. And as we asked questions of organisations, developing relationships was a phrase that we heard a lot. So as I mentioned earlier, each record centre was established independently, so they all set up their own processes, and they obviously developed over time. And not to say that there's right or wrongs, it's just they're just different. And as we move towards the National Biodiversity Network being able to give a picture across the whole of the UK, what you will find is some things that are said to work in a certain way because of the developing relationships don't necessarily quite work how they should. So the important thing is that you monitor the flow, you decide what works best for you to send your records and to do your recording, and then you follow the flow of the data. So you know, if you were sort of recording in iNaturalist, then you would sort of follow the flow of that data into iRecord and then to be verified. And to also, if you don't fall under TVERT, to check, and because not all of the record centres import from iRecord. So that's important to understand, that some things are quite new and they're just sort of getting established. And the important thing is that record, that observation that you see right at the start does end up as a record in the record centre. So I just wanted to have a quick mention on ecologist reports and local record centres. So so this would normally be for perhaps development. So a consultant would be engaged to report on biodiversity for a specific site, and they, part of their research into the site, they'll obviously do some field trips, but they'll also request the records from the local record centre so that they can see what's already been recorded for that area, and then they'll do their field trips and make their own observations. And one would think it would be reasonable to assume that those observations that the ecologists are capturing in their field trips would, of course, they would feed them back to the record centre because they're ecologists, they're passionate about ecology, and they more than anyone understand the importance of having the biodiversity record. So you would assume that that happens, but sadly it's actually quite rare, although it's recommended by the professional bodies. It quite often, more often than not, doesn't happen. Ideally, I believe that it should be mandatory, because then that would remove any sort of conflict of interest from the from the ecologist thinking, well, I'm only paid to do this and that's extra for me, or if the person that's engaging doesn't want them to feed it back. So that would obviously, making it mandatory requirement would take away all of that. So to my mind, that would make sense, but it's not mandatory and it doesn't happen. But the record centres do have a process in place if they are aware of an ecology report. They have processes in place to be able to extract the actual observations and sort of get the records into the system. So if you are aware, if you come across any planning applications that have an ecology report as part of the information, then please just take the time to send. You can just send a link to the record centre and say, hi, just checking that you know about this, and they will appreciate you letting them know, and then they will be able to extract the data if it hasn't been sent in. And that is one thing that I would say, certainly in my experience, don't ever be afraid of contacting the record centre, because they like I said before, they're sponges. They just really want the data and they really want to support you. If you are creating records to send to them, then they love that, and there's a lot of support that they have to be able to help you. So if you're not sure about anything, just ask them. And so that is it. So that's biodiversity recording, and hopefully that's given you an insight into what we mean by this and how you can get involved. And hopefully some of you will get involved in this and be getting records into the record centre. Thank you very much for watching.